contacted me. He suggested that I speak today, and he made the suggestion that perhaps being one of the few of us left who were World War II experienced, that I could mention something about that subject. I mean, that subject took me years to write books about it. So I've just chosen as a subject one page in my logbook, and I'll give you all a copy of it. I've got printouts of it. And before I get on to that at all though, it's to do with P-40s. Now, my introduction to the P-40 is basically what this will be. Before I do, I'll just show you these photos here. That's Jeffrey Fiskin. How many of you have never heard of Jeff Fiskin? Jeff Fiskin was the RNZAF top, excuse my throat, I was hoping it would be better. Jeff Fiskin was the top scoring pilot in the RNZAF, and not in the Pacific. A few more shot down more in the Pacific, but in all he shot down 11 aircraft because he was serving in number 488 squad with Singapore and flying the Brewster Buffaloes. And flying the Brewster Buffaloes, he shot down 6 aircraft, hence the 6 flags there. And in the Pacific he shot down 5 in 2 flights. But he was taken off flying because of injuries he received up in Singapore, when apparently something caused him to be carrying quite a bit of metal from some type of combat experience. Now, he actually died from that reason in 2011, because I knew him personally. Prior to that, I was secretary of Fighter Pilots Association for 11 years, so I got to know Jeff quite well, and I know he was suffering quite badly from the same metal from which he was taken off flying back up in the Pacific. So he only shot down 5 in the Pacific, but then he was, as more or less, invalided out as a pilot. Now, he was the only pilot for whom the Air Force gave a personal aircraft, or allotted a personal aircraft to him, and there it is there, and the numbering on that is 3072. Now, in my logbook, which I've still got here, now I'll perhaps start the talk now based on the fact that the most exciting flying I ever did would be the first 4 or 5 flights at Ohio in August 1944. So I'll just hand out quickly a copy so that you can just follow what I'm talking about better. Okay, the first page is an enlargement of all that we were told about the P-40 before we flew it. It's the sum total. And on the night I arrived at Ohio on the 1st of August, on which day we were just did the normal practice. Whenever, during World War II, every time we visited a new station, the very first thing you did was report to the orderly room and supply them with the name and address of your next of kin. That was the most important thing, apparently. So that's what I did on the 1st of August. Now, if you look down at the second page, you can see that shown there is the total sum of what we had to fly the P-40 after flying to Harvard. Now, we did 3 months on Harvards, in which time I flew 61 different Harvards out of the 202 that the Air Force had. And then, prior to going to Ahakea, we did a whole month of NCO. After getting our wings at Woodburn, we went to Levin, where we attended an NCO's course doing ground drill and discipline, marching, etc., acting as NCOs. So when we arrived at Harkia, I hadn't flown for about 6 weeks. Now, if you look at this page here, you can see that my very first flight was in Harvard 1061, and that my instructor in it was Bob Martin. And Bob Martin was one of the 4 P-40 pilots that each shot down a zero on their first engagement in the Pacific. So, on the 2nd of August, the first day of flying at Harkia, I did 30 minutes with Bob Martin. That's purely to see that we could fly, I guess. And then another 35 minutes of local flying in Harvard 1061. Then that night, we hadn't even sat in a Kittyhawk at that stage. I'd never seen one before, hardly. And on that night, we went into the hangar and sat in a P-40 to go through the takeoff landing drills, which is all we knew about it. Now, at Harvard 1061's got a bit of a soft spot for me because here's a photo taken in Australia of that same Harvard 1061, you can see that. If you can't see these photos properly, I'll leave them on the table here. So that Harvard is now still flying, 1061, so how many years is that now? 1944? 72 years, yeah, 72 years old, and this is how it looks today. It's now owned by a chap, David Salter, who lives in a place you've never heard of called Walcha, W-A-L-C-H-A, New South Wales. And he's an ag pilot, and when this photo here was taken, he took me for a ride in it at Timora. Timora is the Australian Warbirds airfield, like Ardmore is here. And this should be the date on it, the 23rd of October 2009. My wife and I decided to live in Aussie for a few years because we had more family there than here. And so we did actually live there 2007, 2010. In 2009, one day I knew that this plane had gone to Australia. I remember seeing it go through Ardmore here about 1961, Kelvin Stark ferried it over to Aussie. This photo here was taken sometime later of 3 New Zealand Harvards all flying in Australia. Now, October 2009, about 3 months before this photo was taken, I was wondering where 1061 was. I knew it would be somewhere in Australia, so I just went on to Google and typed in Harvard NZ 1061. Within 10 minutes I knew who owned it, where it was, etc. So I phoned him up, and 6 weeks later he said he was going to Timora, and if I liked to join him there, he'd take me for a flight in it, which he did. So this was a flight I did in the same plane about 70 years later. And we did a few loops and rolls, usual thing. Now, David Salter is an ag pilot, a bit like Derek Williams in Tauranga, who's done over 30,000. Well, when that photo was taken, his wife said he had 33,000 hours, mainly in beavers, had his own ag company. And he owns about 6 aircraft now, the Harvard, Cessna 180, Tiger Moth, Gypsy Moth. He's got the oldest aircraft on the Aussie register, it's a Gypsy Moth. And now, just to amuse himself, he's bought a Sue helicopter, so anyway. So he's a really achieved fella. And his hobby, he actually had a son killed in an ag accident, and he and his wife's hobby now is vintage aircraft, and that's how it comes that he's got the earliest, not fox moth, tiger moth, gypsy moth in Australia.
And his last beaver is now back with Hallett Griffin.
Did you have that beaver ever?
No.
No.
That was AZB was
David, who's speaking to me now, is my cousin, and I remember when he was about that high, and I was flying Corsairs at Ardmore. And his house was directly off runway 21, and for some reason all of our squadron members knew that, so I told them down. Anyway, that's another shot of 1061 with... so that's 1061. I'll move off now to flying the P-40, as I say, which I've never seen before until that day. So the following morning, I did one more, what they call sector reco. That's flying to familiarise yourself with the local territory so that you can find the airfield again. So I flew 1061 2 days in a row, and then flew P-40 3082. On this page, there's only, 6 P-40 flights in 3 days. I did my best to try and film myself on 3 of those flights. So might explain some of the things Doug Brook has been mentioning about the accident rate. Okay, now, my first flight was in P-40 3082. It says first solo on type, almost the last. All we had done was sit in the hangar in the cockpit of one, and that's it. That morning after that first Harvard flight, we were just given an aircraft, a P-40 to fly, so I'd go out to it. And it was fairly cold weather then, August, and we were told that to save the batteries on the aircraft, the mechanics would wind the engine up with an inertia starter system, but we used to, knowing how freezing cold it was, we used to tap the starter a wee bit to help them. But anyway, so I started the engine for the first time I'd ever heard an engine going in a P-40, taxied out. Now, we had to use radio with the tower to taxi, but thereafter everything was on lights. All your takeoffs and landings, you had to watch the tower, same as Ardmore has, we used to use them here too. Anyway, it was with lights, so I taxied out, but I was going, we never carried any paperwork with us, but as you know, this sequence, TMFI, etc., we've used that ever since day one in the Air Force, and I still have right through my own flying. And so anyway, taxied out, and I hadn't finished my checks, and I glanced at the tower, and there was a flash, 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 flash. Now, the reason for that was probably, obviously, someone coming into land and they wanted me to get airborne. Well, at Ohakia, there were 60 pilots doing the same thing at the same time. This is my own OTU, 4 OTU, but we had number 2 OTU, and their aircraft had white spinners, and number 4 OTU, we had red spinners. So that's my OTU there. There's 30 of us and 30 in the other OTU. As well as that, there was a squadron of Venturas also doing their OTU flying. And there were up to 1,100 takeoffs and landings a day at Ohakia then, 1,100. And while I was still doing my checks, as I say, I noticed that the tower was flashing a green light too. Put that in now, you can hear it now?
Yeah.
Anyway, I saw the tower flashing the green at me, and it immediately made me think, well, he wants me to hurry up. So I hadn't really finished the check, so I taxied out, took off, still doing the checks, got airborne, and I was mesmerised almost by this long thing sticking out the front, big long nose in front. And so I wasn't even looking inside of the instrument, hardly. I don't think anyone told me what speed to climb at anyway. So, yeah, thanks. Anyway, it didn't take long to get to about 2,000 feet, no doubt. I just guessworked. But I just decided that I'd turn right towards Palmerston North. So I just hit the stick over, and the next minute, obviously the airspeed wasn't where it should have been, because the horizon went like that. I stalled. The first turn after the first takeoff in the P-40. What saved my life, I think, was the fact that flying the Harvards, we absolutely thrashed them. We used to snap roll them, even doing instrument flying and snap roll them. And those poor Harvards were thrashed. And my reaction to this flick was exactly the same as recovering from a snap roll. Just stick forward and opposite rudder. It's automatic. And that stopped the P-40. I was about bent like that when I reached the turn. The next minute, the horizon did that. And I hit left rudder and stick forward, and the stock had inverted, completely inverted. But it did prove that if you were quick enough, you could stop any aircraft from a flick. That's why we were taught to stick forward opposite rudder. We weren't taught of any particular theory to do with it, but just stick forward opposite rudder, and that's all you needed to know. And that stopped that Kittyhawk there, which proves that with a light aircraft, you're pretty dumb if you can't stop a flick. When the P-40 had 35 pounds per square foot wing loading. So any light aircraft, if you're quick enough, you should be able to stop it by just stick forward and opposite rudder. Anyway, but my brain immediately said, I had no idea what airspeed I was at, I was looking outside, but my brain just said, airspeed. I still remember it clearly. And so I didn't try to roll out. I thought, well, I'll let the nose lower and gain some speed. It's only then that I started looking in the cockpit. I allowed the speed to build up. And while I was waiting for that, directly in front of me, some of you have read this in my book, was the tallest building in Palmerston North, T&G Insurance Company, and it was upside down in my windscreen. Anyway, I rolled out of that okay, and from there on I had no drama on that flight. Just flew around.